It is my great pleasure to welcome a colleague of mine, Levi Haeck. I'm very happy that you are here today with us. Levi Haeck is a postdoctoral researcher at Kent University, Department of Philosophy and Moral Sciences in Belgium, funded by the Scientific Research Foundation Flanders. He is working on Kant's logic, transcendental logic, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and more generally on Kantian approaches to the life sciences, for example, KGM, and neo-Kantianism, but is also recently becoming increasingly interested in Kant's practical philosophy too. So he recently defended his PhD thesis, Kant's epigenetic seek into the synthetic a priori, deriving the categories as a critique of predication. So an article on the categories of quantity is forthcoming. It's in Kant Studien. It's already published. Yes, and his postdoctoral project is about Kant's fascinating but elusive wish to construct a transcendental grammar out of the table of categories. Yeah. Hi.
That's great. Thank you so much for this long introduction, Bojana. So indeed, for me, this is also quite exciting. It's not a bit closer. Okay. Yeah, for me, this is already quite exciting because it's the first time I'm going to venture into Kant's practical philosophy. Now, before I start, maybe I should comment a bit on my title. So the official title on the abstract is The Actuality of Evil as the Ground of the Possibility of the Good. Now, in a sense, this is a bit of a confusing title. What I actually mean is the actuality of evil is the ground of the hope in the good. That's the more correct way to interpret my title. Okay, so you can still hear me well, or like the distance is fine? Okay, like this? Good. So it's well known, of course, that for Kant we should do philosophy by approaching it on the basis of three basic questions. What can I know? What ought I to do? What may I hope? And this is summarized by a fourth question, what is man? Now, the purpose of this paper is twofold. First, I want to find a new answer to the third question of hope, but I want to do so in such a way that this question becomes relevant to the issue as to what kind of sentiment is to be cultivated vis-à-vis the ongoing violent conflicts across the globe. And specifically, my claim will be that the good, so one of the possible objects that we can hope for, is possible precisely because evil is already, in some sense, actual. And so here I take possible in the material sense, so not in the merely logical sense. And to arrive at this response, I first focus on question one, then I gradually move on to the second and the third question, and I will, as Kant wishes, always keep the fourth question in mind. So first of all, what can I know? Basically, for Kant, I can know things in nature. But what is nature? Nature is, on the one hand, the sum total of all appearances, which he calls natura materialiter spectata. On the other hand, all appearances of nature, as far as their combination is concerned, stand under the categories, on which nature depends as the original ground of its necessary lawfulness, which he calls natura formaliter spectata. And what's at stake here is a kind of a hylomorphism of nature, a kind of matter-form relationship that lies at the basis of nature, or to put it more crudely, that lies at the basis of reality. And so according to Kant, it's very important here to ask the question, what can I know? And so what can I know as a finite yet rational thinker, for instance, I as a human being? So as a rational being that only has access to some reality by means of their senses. So without receiving sensory impressions, we cannot know anything. But those impressions themselves, as such, are still too chaotic, too raw to generate some knowable reality, some knowable nature. In themselves, sensible impressions give us nothing other than what Kant calls a manifold of intuition, which as such is blind. So this manifold still needs to be determined, and that is done by means of concepts. And these concepts, they don't come from our senses, but from our understanding. And so only when our understanding applies concepts to the manifold of intuition can objects appear, can we relate to objects that can from then on be studied using all kinds of empirical research methods. And so basically there are two human ingredients that underlie nature that make nature possible: the sensible matter of our senses and the conceptual form of our thoughts. And so interestingly then, nature consists of a faculty which operates in nature, but which does not belong to nature properly so called. So material nature is in a sense made possible by something which is not material at all, the forms of thought that spontaneously produce concepts. And so this means that although nature is made possible by thought, this thought must itself nonetheless be seen as being completely independent of that nature. And so the fact that we can separate thought from nature in this way is the basis of the question of freedom, the second question, what must I do? And so we read in the Kritik der reinen Vernunft, so I quote, "Man is one of the appearances in the sensible world, and in that sense also one of the natural causes which must obey empirical laws. In inanimate or merely animal nature, we find no ground for thinking of faculties other than as determined by sensory conditions. But man, who otherwise knows all nature exclusively through the senses, also knows himself through mere apperception, namely in actions and inner qualifications which he cannot classify as sensory impressions. He himself is partly appearance, but partly also pure intelligible object, namely in regard to certain faculties whose action cannot be regarded as part of the receptivity of the senses. And we call these faculties intelligence and reason." Now, this idea that man as a rational being can never be regarded merely as an object of nature is then taken up famously in his Grundlegung, where he says, and I quote again, "Now, a human being really finds in himself a capacity by which he distinguishes himself from all other things, even from himself, insofar as he is affected by objects, and that is reason. And this reason, as pure self-activity, is raised even above the understanding by this, that though understanding is also self-activity, and does not, like sense, contain merely presentations that arise when we are affected by things, and thus are passive in a sense, yet it can produce from its activity no other concepts than those which serve merely to bring sensible presentations under rules and thereby to unite them in one consciousness." So if it were not for this sensibility, it would not think anything at all. But reason, on the contrary, shows in what we call ideas a spontaneity so pure that it thereby goes far beyond anything that sensibility can ever afford it, and proves its highest occupation in distinguishing the world of sense and the world of the understanding from each other, and thereby marking the limits for the understanding. So the understanding is our faculty of thought insofar as it relates to intuitions and thus serves nature. Reason, on the other hand, is our faculty of thought insofar as it turns away from intuitions to think free actions not bound by nature. And so Kant arrives at a crucial qualification: everything in nature works according to laws, only a rational being has the ability to act according to the Vorstellung of laws, that is, according to principles, or it has a will. And it's of course on the basis of this qualification of man as both a natural object and a free object or subject that Kant arrives at his famous categorical imperative, which you of course all know, which states that I may never otherwise act than in such a way that I can also will that my maxim be a general law. So, but the interesting thing here is that just as nature had a hylomorphic structure, subjecting intuitions qua matter to the concepts of the understanding qua form, we can discern a similar modal or hylomorphic structure in the realm of freedom. So Kant says there we must subject our maxims to the general law, and to render a maxim to be good, the matter of my maxim must be subsumed under the form of lawfulness as such. And so this rational ability to think only the things I should do and shouldn't do is the basis of my freedom. And what's happening here is I extract a level of pure normativity from the descriptive level of nature. Nature being a state of description, a playing field of knowability. But we have already seen that this nature itself would be impossible without a level of normativity within it, because we must subject our blind intuitions to concepts in order to acquire an object of study. And there is a must to that. We must do that. So it's a kind of immanent normativity that stems from the same rational faculties that at the same time allow us to turn our backs on nature. So the same rational faculty that makes nature possible allows us to go against nature. So the fact that I can contrast the automaticity of my sensible nature with the rational faculty in me, namely I can compare the two, that's what gives me free will in the most liminal sense. So just what allows me to think myself as a being with free will. And so in this way we have gone through the first two questions of philosophy, and we have done so by means of the fourth question as a guiding thread. And so the first question actually leads to the second question in a sense. But okay, what about the third question? What may I hope for? Is the good possible in the material sense, so not just logically, but does the good as an object of hope correspond to the first postulate of modality? Can I effectively insert freedom into the natural order of things? Because knowing what the good is, knowing what I must do, is in some respects still not a guarantee of its execution. So why should we deem ourselves able to effectively go against nature itself? And to understand this, we must look at die Religion. And here Kant says, interestingly, and I quote, as regards the question of whether man is good or bad, the distinction cannot possibly lie in the difference between the motivations that man includes in his maxim, so not in the matter of his maxim. But it must lie in the hierarchy between the drives, and so in the form, in the question of which of them he makes the condition of the other. So man, even the best, is therefore only bad because he reverses the moral order of the drives when they are included in his maxims. So he does indeed include the moral law in addition to that of self-love in his maxims. However, he realizes that the one cannot be on equal footing with the other, but that one must always subordinate the one to the other as like the upper condition. And then he makes the drives of self-love and their tendencies the condition of observance of the moral law. So this is a rather complex passage, but I want to extract the following takeaway from it. So here we see that the hope for the good is possible because evil, in a sense, already exists, right? Because evil happens when one does take the moral law into account, but still choose to subordinate the moral law to our material, natural wishes and whims. So, for instance, we do follow the moral law, but only when doing so would suit us. So, in other words, evil is not a mere property of our state of nature as objects, as unfree beings. Evil does not come from our animality as such. On the contrary, evil is possible precisely because we are both animals and rational beings at the same time. So evil, in a sense, involves a rational choice made on the basis of the faculty of reason to put reason aside as of secondary importance. And that also means that evil is characterized by the exact same hylomorphic or modal structure as the good, namely of the matter of our maxims and the form of the law. But of course, with that difference that in the case of evil, the structure is reversed. Evil is simply the good, you could say, given its perverse form. Evil places matter on the level of form and form on the matter of matter. But importantly, the actuality of this perversion, so the actuality of evil, confirms the actuality of the modality of matter and form as such. So, seemingly in line with the factum der Vernunft of the second critique, the Religion seems to assume that modality as such, hylomorphism, is actual. So the fact that the world is full of evil can be a ground of hope that the good could also take place exuberantly. The good only requires that we use that hylomorphic structure that's already there, but that we use it differently. So this structure is already there, you could say, as a germ in the world, in us, in our discourse. And this, I argue, is the key to understanding Kant's views on human progress, for instance, in Mutmaßlicher Anfang der Menschengeschichte, in which he meditates on our sorrow and our discontent with the providence that governs the course of the world, when we are estimating the ills that so much oppress humankind, leaving us with no hope for anything better. His point, however, is that it is of the greatest importance to be content with providence, partly in order to grasp courage even among our toils, and partly so that we might not lose sight of our own responsibility, which might perhaps be the sole cause of all these ills, and avoid the remedy against them, which consists in self-improvement. So that's what Kant says in Mutmaßlicher Anfang. And so rather than interpreting this conclusion of self-improvement as some disappointing, perhaps, call for a crude kind of suck-it-up mentality, I read this as a testimony of my view that it is the actuality of evil that must propel us to hope for the possibility of the good. And so additionally, in the same text, Kant says that man must not blame providence for the ills that oppress him. Man is also not justified in ascribing his own misdeeds to an original crime of his ancestral parents, but rather man must accept with full right what they did as having been done by himself, and attribute all ills arising from the misuse of his reason entirely to himself, since he can very well become conscious of the fact that he would have done the exact same thing in their circumstances. So not only do we need to look at evil as a part of the historical progress towards the good, for instance, we don't only need to acknowledge the role of some unsocial sociability, which contains an evil that forces us to install political institutions, which in turn cultivate our moral dispositions and enables the good to take place. We also need to acknowledge that evil already points to our rational nature, although it still needs to be developed. So, in a sense, we need the epigenetic teleological story offered by Kant in Mutmaßlicher Anfang and elsewhere in order to grasp how human beings could progress from evil reason to good reason, from, you could say, reason 1 to reason 2. Yet, to borrow the words of Kant's essay on Aufklärung, we can only transition from immaturity to maturity, so from reason 1 to reason 2, if we grant that our initial immaturity was self-incurred from the beginning, and that the initial phase of immaturity was therefore, in fact, bearing the germ of maturity from the get-go. And that's also why in Mutmaßlicher Anfang he starts his Menschengeschichte with man as a speaking being that's already rational. So evil, in a sense, is just a phase of our rational faculty manifesting itself through time. And so then in the Anthropologie, we read that even a human being of evil character, like Sulla, though he arouses disgust through the violence of his firm maxims, is nevertheless also an object of admiration, because we generally admire strength of soul. And this, you could say, is we generally admire this play with matter and form. So evil points to the germs of reason already at work in the world. And so, in fact, I must also rephrase my title again. It's not the actuality of evil per se, but the actuality of modality, so of hylomorphism. Namely, it's the actuality of the germs of reason as such that counts as the ground of my hope that the good might be possible. Yeah, thanks.
So, time for questions, comments, observations.
Thank you for your presentation. I like very much this is why I wrote it down, your insistence that there is a normativity in nature itself, so that nature and normativity in Kant cannot be separated in so clear-cut way, but that the very same capacity that makes nature possible makes also possible that we can distance ourselves from the nature. This is, I think, very, very well put, and I think that it touches to something in Kant's overall structure. However, your presentation, the actuality of evil, even as modality, as the ground of the possibility of the good, to me it would be a perfect, very, let's say, standard title for a paper on Hegel. However, not on Kant. Why? You at a certain point you formulated evil is the rational choice to set our rationality aside. And I think this is a quite good description of what evil should be, how evil should be described. But I think that Kant basically doesn't have the resources, conceptual resources, to do it. Especially in critique of practical reason, I don't think that there is even a possibility to conceive a possibility of reason. He speaks of evil. Yeah. He speaks of evil on one place. It's always about doing the good, not to omitting the evil, or far less of doing evil. On one singular occasion, he defines evil as an object of our Abscheuungsvermögen, according to the general laws. But this is the sole incidence of Abscheuungsvermögen in his entire opus, and I think it's a contradiction in term. Necessary object of Abscheuungsvermögens according to the general laws. So, and this is also a standard argument against Kant's morality of pure reason, that it makes evil logically impossible. There can only be good or nothing else. There cannot be evil. So that changes in Religionsschrift, where he explicitly introduces capacity of evil. However, he defines this in different way, not as evil as the rational choice to set our rationality aside, but something that is inexplicable, that is produced in intelligible by intelligible deed in a present that was never present, in a past that was never present, which basically means that it cannot be explained. It is only deduced from the fact that that evil is actual. However, this is something that, according to his own presupposition, cannot be observed, because it's a question. This is not empirical finding. It's a question of maxims precisely, and then that cannot be seen. It could be only a result of sovereign decision, let's say, which is impossible, and then put in intelligible past. And it goes even further, since by intelligible deed, it's our intelligible character itself that is determined. So, strictly speaking, if we were Kantian in ontology, we should leave our hopes, put our hopes aside, because intelligible character can be determined only once, if it can be determined at all. It's something that is out of the reach of time and logically allows of no change. So as a Kantian, I should say, yes, I'm okay. If we assume that I decided to determine the hierarchy of principles, yes, I'm evil, and I will stay evil. It's no other way. I'm stuck in the evil.
Okay, okay.
Only thing that can save me is a miracle.
Yeah, right, okay.
And this is not a rational hope.
Right, but I think so. I can follow your reasoning up until the Religion. I just think that Kant in the Religion, he opens up the standpoint of anthropology, and then it's quite different, right? So then it ceases to be this state that we kind of grasp qua its origin or something. It is in the anthropology. It's full of statements of evil actions of human beings that are not as such evil. But yeah, like there is like this argument of playing with your maxims and the form of the law. So he assumes in anthropology, he assumes a subject that is able to play with that. So I agree that in the pure side of things, so in the Grundlegung and in the second critique, there is no place for evil. And in the Religion, because it's still in the grips of the previous works, it is hard. He doesn't have all the resources, I agree, to give it a place in that text, but he already opens up this anthropological perspective on evil, where human beings are seen in a historical way, where they can, I mean, first they learn to choose, and they learn to follow up on their choices, and this already installs this hylomorphic structure of matter and form, of maxim and law. So in a sense, that perspective, I agree that it comes from the back door, in a sense, that he adds it onto his general, pure, practical reason, where he's maybe not able to fully give a place to evil. But if you consider this fourth question, what is man, then you must, I think, give some status to evil, not as some original position, but as really something that we can do, right? I mean, the quote from the Anthropologie is also a testimony to that, I think.
Thank you, Levi. This was brilliant and eloquent, as one would expect from you. So I really enjoyed it. I really liked how you turned the usual question of how come people do evil things into the opposite question, which is like it's almost the actuality itself is evil. I mean, and the good is all in the potentiality. So my question from this perspective would be super simple and stupid even, perhaps. You focused almost, I mean, you almost made it sound that yes, actuality is evil, and what is to be human is to be this potentiality for good, which I think is a very interesting idea. I spontaneously kind of like it. But at the same time, I mean, from this perspective, how do you explain the potentiality for evil? I mean, is there such a thing as potentiality for evil?
Well, in a sense, yes. If you regard evil as a stage of the development of reason, which aims at the highest good, if evil is a stage at that development on this line of history, then maybe indeed at first, the first step of the germs of reason forming themselves would be to become like evil in that sense, yeah, right? So it is evil deeds. You already have a conception of the law. It's just not the pure law, right? And that's maybe the first step that a human being needs to take, to assume, to then develop that capacity into the capacity for the good. So if it's an intermediate kind of goal, then yes, but not. It's never going to be the goal, I think, of the development of reason. Yeah, but I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I find this topic fascinating. And my first question is, so what's the difference between an evil deed and a selfish deed? Mm-hmm. Because then I agree pretty much with you that it's very hard, even in the religion, so to find something that goes out of this Kantian paradigm that you have acting according to the moral law, which is freedom, and acting according to your inclinations or according to self-love.
Right.
Is there a third category? So that's my first question, which would be evil.
Right.
And then what would that be? My second question zooms a little bit out of this, because I was reminded of this critique that critical theory, so Horkheimer, Adorno had concerning Kant, because then they said, well, but in human history, we had a manifestation of evil in the Holocaust, and that was a dimension of evil that made them very skeptical than to go on and think in some like teleology paradigm of history or in some terms of hope that human beings could, I mean, from that framing them directly achieve their own improvement or something like that. So that made them speak of a dialectics of enlightenment, so that they needed a dialectic stage in order to overcome this evil that manifested itself within history. And their thesis was so that what you're saying, that we should discover that our rationality is able to subsume matter under form. So Adorno would exactly say that this is part of the problem and not the solution, because what one needs is then some reconciliation of matter and form, so what he sees in art. And I would just like ask, so how you see this comment influencing, so this hope that the ability to bring up such evil shows that we're able to do the good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe to start with the first question, it wasn't clear to me what the third category would be. Like it
Evil.
Ah, okay.
Or is evil
the first
part
one
of
good?
self-love?
Oh, okay. Well, I think so. I think self-love is the most general way in which we can conceive evil to come about, if it comes about. So in that sense, I wouldn't take evil to be like the third category or something. I'm not sure why that would be necessary.
But if you only have self-love and acting according to the moral law, then you can only realize freedom if you're acting according to the moral law.
Right, okay.
And then if you're acting according to your inclinations, that's just a deprivation.
Yeah.
and then there is no possibility
Okay,
to
then-
evil as a rational choice to do.
okay. Then I would
The-
agree it must
yeah.
be like a third category, probably, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to compare the two. I'm not sure if that's a huge problem for Kant's system. I mean, the systematic aspects also need to include the anthropology, right? And there it's there it might have a place. Or is that not systematic? But maybe the second question about dialectics, or
Yes,
you
so
wanna-
the point of Horkheimer and Adorno was that evil in history was something like the Holocaust, and that might make it impossible after that happened to look for a simple solution, that man who's able to do something like this. So genocide, mass murder, not only acting to inclinations and then give a false promise to borrow money and never return it, but large scale, whether that
Right.
shouldn't make us think about this paradigm, so that we hope that when people bring about something like this, they could, with the same faculty, bring about the good. And I think that's the reason why Horkheimer and Adorno spoke of a dialectics of enlightenment and didn't see some simple solution, but yeah.
Okay, so maybe two things about this. On the one hand, I think the question of hope becomes more prominent when evil becomes more severe and harsh. So it's not a question of probability. So indeed, I mean, we might become very pessimistic about the potentiality of the good taking place given the Holocaust, but hope becomes more like purified in that context. So it becomes like a purified kind of hope to still uphold that hope and to not change your mind given these empirical true horror shows, in a sense. So that cannot, in a sense, change our view of what it means to hope for the good. It can change our view of what, like the potentiality, the possibility of it taking place in a sense of what's the chance of it taking place. Are the odds in our favor or not? Then maybe the Holocaust can change our view, right? But it couldn't affect what hope means for us, I think. And then the first remark, well, in a sense, I think the fact that evil would be manifested as part of the Enlightenment project, and that reason is indeed behind these horror shows, well, that's also already in Kant. So there is some continuity to look at the horror of the Holocaust from Kant to the Frankfurter Schule in that sense, that evil, horror is not necessarily running counter to rationality, can be part of rationality. So that would be my way of dealing with that. But again, the question of the Holocaust, if that makes you doubt the possibility of the good, then it's a matter of optimism versus pessimism. This doesn't touch hope, I think. Hope becomes even stronger in the face of the Holocaust. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it was really an achievement to sort of locate evil so clearly within the structure of the whole system. And what I sort of want to invite you to do is to, I think this is following some of the questions here, but I want to separate two levels. First, within what remains sort of let's call it a self-ethics, right? An individualist one. It seems to me, without getting too technical with Kant's own distinction, radical, etc., that we can speak, and I wasn't entirely clear which one you meant, about something like ordinary evil, weakness of character, pathological, which would be to slide from rationality to rationalization, to put it in simple terms, right? This is the one way to understand the reversal you speak about, which is something we do ordinarily. And then hope would be tied indeed to maturity, and it would be individual, the prospect for myself to do that a little bit less, to take distance from myself, to take responsibility for my own immaturity, etc. Then there is a more character, maybe, level of things, which I think, in today's words, cynical attitude would describe it better, which is to say, it's not only that I rationalize things, there's nothing but rationalization. This would be a deeper kind of reversal, which is to say, everybody who speaks in rational, universal terms is just putting on a mask. I know that all too well, and I will pretend like everybody else, but I know what the real order of things is. And then, again, internally, if that is your attitude, there is no hope. There is no prospect for my self-improvement. I'm just as bad as everybody else, and that's fine as it is. So that's one level where I think a crucial sort of distinction as to what you mean by reversal or would help. And then, of course, the other question, just because you did make this necessary excursion into what is enlightenment, is, of course, the question of how we get from this very self-improvement kind of perspective on an individual level to a hope that is broader. Not that I might be, in my case, it's doomed, but some people internally might see themselves as being possibly better, but that good will somehow, take more root in society. So these are my two questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. To start with the second question, I think that the equivalent of a state, for instance, being able to do the good, is precisely this institutionalization. That would be a way for the state to structurally incorporate the way in which it subsumes its maxims under the law, right? So that would be, for a more global question that transgresses this merely individual perspective, it's about political institutions. That would be my guess, my conjecture in that regard. Because that's as if an individual acts according to the way in which it kind of installs its life according to the moral law. Well, the state does that by means of institutions. And then the first question, I am still on board with the idea that eventually we don't know whether we follow the moral law, right? We always, there's only like this external perspective possible for us that we can act in line with the moral law, not against it, but whether we act from the moral law, indeed, there is not enough introspection for human beings available that we can really qualify when we are acting in line with the moral law or not. However, when you, like in discourse, in introspection, it can still be revealed, I think, that it's highly unlikely that you are acting in accordance, in line with the moral law. So when you have the slightest idea that you might be misusing the moral law and placing some matter in the position of form and vice versa, when you have this introspective hint that that might be the case, then you just need to move on from that. However, it's not because we don't know whether this is the case that we should just avoid this issue, right? So there is absolutely no certainty that we are acting from the moral law, but that shouldn't preclude us from trying, right? So as human beings, as subjects, it's a different story. Like again in the anthropology, we are in a pragmatic mood, right? So then in a sense we have to leave behind to some extent the pure aspects of Kant's system and just deal with these ingredients as acting human beings. And then the whole story of introspection not being entirely trustworthy cannot be an excuse, I think. Or have I misunderstood your question?
I just meant that I don't want to, take off more of everybody's time. I just meant that there is a difference between there's two ways of understanding what reversal here amounts to.
Yeah.
And in one of them, I'm interested, in principle, in doing better in light of it. I know at some level I should be more rational. I aim towards it, and I find myself faking, or I'm interested in that kind of criteria. And in the other case, reversal means I don't. I don't aspire to do better in that sense because there is no better. That is what that reversal would mean. So I was asking you or inviting you to distinguish between these two.
Okay. Well, I think...
You don't have to go. I mean,
Okay. But in my talk, it was definitely the second one that was prominent, right? Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Thank you for the provocative and interesting thesis. Although I'm a bit skeptical, like many others, but my question is actually I will keep it about the narration of the argument. So the idea is, as far as I understand, and correct me if I misunderstand something, that okay, Kant have on many places thought about possibility of influence of the freedom on the nature, and this, in this sense, modality is not something that should be solved with evil, but okay, in that sense, evil can show. Let's accept that evil manifestation of evil can show us that rationality can be in a world. So I don't agree, but let's say that it is the case. Then, which is the degree of the argument or necessity of this? Because also beauty show it, also sublime show it, also good guests can, in similar way, probably show it. So the degree is low. So evil show it a little, but yeah. And another additional question is, if we understand that evil is kind of perversion of maxims, so it has something to do with rationality, but it manifests itself in your nature in some perverted way, then would it contribute to our hope or rather make it more hopeless? Because even the rationality can go wrong, and then we become even more helpless and hopeless because even this hope can go wrong. So I think actually that this is, and I read Kant in this way, this is the problem we should address, how to deal with it to get a hopeful society and not evil, even if rationality can influence the society, rather than something that contributes to hope. That's my problem.
Right, yeah. Of course, if you don't have Kant's epigenetic view on the development of reason as a capacity, then indeed the fact that reason can be operative in evil can indeed be a ground for cynicism, I agree. But if you have the idea of Kant, of reason, as something that develops in a purposive way, then I think there is no room for that cynicism. Then you must see evil as a phase, as one step of some kind of development. But of course, if you don't have this view of the purpose of reason, then indeed I think there is a problem there. Then the manifestation of reason in evil is not a ground for hope, because that might be the only thing we're capable of, using reason to do evil. That would then be the end point or something. So the hope is connected to this historical, purposive story that he's also trying to tell. The first question wasn't completely clear to me about the pervasiveness of modality or something.
Just if manifestation of evil contribute to our understanding of manifestation of rationality in nature, we should many better examples show how much the degree of the argument is relevant, because we have better solution. But okay. Your second answer and probably also to my
right. Yeah.
Okay. And I also want to pose a question. There's a question there.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful. So I have two questions. One is shorter and straight to the point, and second one maybe a bit more, not necessarily confused, but in terms of, let's say, Kantian interpretations of the critique of pure reason and then of the practical reason. The first one is quite straightforward. So when I was listening to your talk and also reading the title, the Hegelian connections were already pointed out. But I was thinking about Hegel's point that, you know, the appearance of absolute good, so the very idea of absolute good, that we could possess it or that it's possible, is in itself evil. So in a sense, the thought that we could achieve the possible, there is such a thing as absolute good, is evil. So in a sense,
For Hegel.
yes, for Hegel. So I was just thinking about that. And in that sense, you know, I think it ties down to in a sort of way, like I was thinking about some clarifications in terms of, do you think that this idea of the good in Kant and the idea of hope implies a kind of tendency of ours that we can achieve this good, which also manifests in the hope, but also does it tie to your reading of Kant as proposing an epigenetic of reason, for instance? So you can have this reading of the Critique of Pure Reason, that we go from sensibility and then to understanding and to reason, which is a kind of a hierarchy of the good in a specific sense. And the second question was, couldn't we also have a reading of, you know, a dark side of Kant, in a sense, like uncanny Kant, if you can say that, you know, if we start with the presupposition from the beginning that there's a dualism in Kant between form and matter, for instance, like the categories of the understanding and the spatio-temporal appearances of sensibility. But there are also some points in Kant, for instance, where, you know, in the deduction, but they say that, you know, the categories themselves get singularized. They have to appear in a certain way, even though they don't appear in themselves. And then in the critique of practical reason, we infer our capacity for freedom from the fact that, for instance, we feel guilty. That means that we infer transcendentally that we've done something. So this kind of is maybe a question of clarification in a sense, this progression into the future that, you know, you read into Kant, doesn't it also imply a retrospective reading of the things that we've already done to infer our freedom from it?
Yeah, absolutely. The last point. So Kant's argument seems to be a regressive analysis of a potential progressive movement, a progressive movement that's already going on and will be going on onwards. So the regression, the progression are in Kant's system, I think, always to be put together. And so indeed, we can regress from certain results to their ground. Guilt makes us aware of something. The law as such makes us aware of freedom. And also, indeed, evil, I mean, is pointing to some capacity of knowing what the good is, what the right thing to do is, right? So evil, in a sense, is also me regressing to some ground in reason. And so the issue of epigenesis is also very important in that regard. So if you, as Kant seems to suggest, if you think that we can model this progression of the faculty of reason towards the highest good, if we can model that on epigenesis in biology, then that can be quite helpful in the sense that an organism, when it's growing, it is able to acquire its mature form, right? It's able to do that. And everything in its organization is set for the organism to acquire a mature form. But that doesn't mean it will acquire the mature form, right? So it can still die prematurely. So, and that's, I think, how we should look at this highest good issue, or this peace issue. That yes, everything in the makeup of reason is set to acquire that, but given the harsh circumstances, probably if we look at this reason as an organism, it won't probably arrive at that point. Just like many organisms die before they acquire their mature form. So that's, I'm not sure I completely got the point about categories being singularized, although I think that's part of your comment on the regression in Kant's argument. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Just a really quick one, if I can, because it's a really shared topic. Actuality of evil in Kant, the way you describe it now. Evil as a rational choice to put reason aside, that's absolutely something a Hegel would surely, sign off. Because why? Because it manifests logical structure of the reason itself for Hegel, namely singularity of reason, Einzelheit, böse zu sein heißt einzeln zu sein in Hegel. So what does it mean? It means, well, there are my reasons, and then let's say reasons of universality, and conceptually they are both on pair. And now the perversion of form happens. I make my reasons, I give them the form of universality. So this means I'm böse, but I'm rational, because it reflects upon the very necessary structure of the reason itself, singularity. So I was wondering, is or would actuality of evil, the way you described it in Kant, correspond to something like this, like singularity of reason?
Yeah, I think so, and that ties in with the argument of Kant having to regress from reason's manifestations, its singularities, you could say, to the presupposed transcendental ground thereof.
Yeah.
And I think Kant is maybe a bit Hegelian in that regard. I'm okay with this convergence of their views on this topic. Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so thank you very much for the discussion, and thank you, Levi, for this wonderful talk.